You're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
Give me a full ballerina skirt and a hint of saloon, and I'm on board.
I can't go back.
Welcome to the She Became Visible podcast. I'm your host, René Steelman. This podcast is my story. It's your story. It's our story. It's all the stories of all the women who one day knew that it was time to remember who they were, who they are, and stand up and be seen. Hello, welcome to She Became Visible. I am your host, René Steelman, and that.
Where am I?
It's the reversal.
Yes.
There is my fabulous co-host, Lila. How are you today?
Doing good. I'm excited about this one today.
Yeah, I am too. And you know what? I was thinking, I thought I have to do a mashup because every time we do a podcast together, I want to start singing Layla. And it's Layla, got you on my knee, Layla. And then Summur Rayn, I want to start going, Summur Rayn makes me feel fine. And I don't think that's the words, but the tempo.
Freeze, but good enough. Close.
And then I've got Just Walk Away, René, so I could be the end. Oh, we all three have songs. But yes, today we have a fabulous podcast. So Lila, tell me, you know Summur. Tell me how you know Summur.
I know Summur because, I met her the very first time at Sandra Tanner's birthday party. And Summur was there, and I didn't know who she was, but I saw her and we chatted. And then John DeLynn said, that's Burgess Owen's daughter. And I had gone on several dates with Burgess.
Oh, no.
Oh my gosh, I've heard him talk all about her. I knew, he talked about his daughter Summur all the time. So I knew who she was because of that. So then, of course I had to introduce myself. So then we got to know each other that way. We chatted online. We chatted, texted.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, I met Summur at the Sunstone last year at the picnic afterwards. And she was just illuminating. I mean, just so happy and and she was sitting there and she introduced herself and we just started talking and she was telling a little bit about her life. And I'm going to bring her on, let her introduce herself. But I have to tell the funniest story is she's talking about her family and her life and, and where she's at in the church and all of that. And then she shows me a picture of her mom, and her mom is at her wedding, her mom's recent wedding. And I'm like, wait, who did your mom marry?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is happening here? So I'm going to have her tell that story too. But what I love about Summur is she has so many experiences that are different than we, but also the exact same that we have had. And I love that. I love that we were all three different parts of the country, different introductions to the church, different experiences in the church, but we all had this little naive, cultish belief, and we all came to our senses. But let's bring Summur on and have her introduce herself, and we will get this party going. So Summur, there she is.
Hello. What an introduction.
Well, I tell you, so tell the audience when you tell your story. So we're sitting at the picnic table at the picnic for the Sunstone. She gets out this picture from the People magazine, first of all. And I mean, I thought I was kind of cool because my daughter's wedding was in a Portland wedding magazine. So, but this was the People magazine. And I'm looking at her mom and her new husband, and I'm like, I said, is that Wayne Brady? And she goes, no. And I'm like, I knew he was famous And but I was like, what? How is this person sitting next to me showing me a picture of this famous Hollywood star? So tell us a little bit about your life and how you were raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and where I mean, we're going to go through your whole life in a little over an hour. But just kind of give us a little bit so that the audience, this audience that you're talking to now, I mean, many people may have already heard your Mormon stories and heard you on some other podcasts, but I'm hoping that there are people out there that this is all new to them. So tell us how this young Black girl is living in Utah, married to a white guy, used to be a Mormon, is no longer a Mormon. Put that synopsis in 5 minutes. Go.
Okay, here we go. Let's start the timer. I'm going to tell you, I've done Mormonism Live with Bill Reel and RFM, and I just did Mormon Stories with John DeLynn and Margie. But you've made it when René calls and says, let's get you on a call with Lila, and we're going to get you on She Became Visible. And then I was like, whoa, I have made it. Like, people know me.
Oh,
now.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
This is no joke. Like a woman podcast, let's go.
Yeah.
But
I don't think, and that is one of the things about this podcast is I was looking something up. People don't understand the need for women to gather. There was a reason why there are quilting bees or the Relief Society getting together and canning or making, packages for the homeless and things like that. Women need to be together. They need to talk. They need to work out their things that are going on in their lives. And that was therapy for women. We could go out to lunch with a bunch of our girlfriends, come back and go, okay, I'm good. I got it off my chest.
Absolutely.
And now I can go on. And we've lost that because we no longer live in these communities. But that is what She Became Visible is really, this is why I try to have female guests on. This is a group of women helping women. So absolutely.
And can I just say too, it's not an easy space to be in. What you guys are doing is not an easy space to be in because, and I can only speak from the Mormonism experience, right? But we kind of have an indoctrination that we listen to men, right? So even as a woman, I would gravitate more towards LDS men podcasts or men podcasts with a female co-host, right? And I had to unlearn that. As a woman, and I'd like to think I'm intelligent and I love to hear women voices. I still had to unlearn that for a few years where I said, why am I only subscribing to these podcasts? Why am I only listening to these priesthood holders, right? And so I am going to say that the space that you guys are holding for women, I just love because when we are ready to have our voices heard and to listen to other experiences in a safe space that we as women can understand, you're here, and I really appreciate that because there's not a lot of women only spaces. We talk about Relief Society and we might get into that a little bit later, but Brigham Young disbanded that. I mean, I just learned that a year ago for 30 years. So there's a lot of spaces that we're told, even within the church, that are women's spaces and we're so important. But when you look at the history, we're kind of a footnote, less than a footnote, because you can't even follow the footnote for our history. So just want to say thank you. Thank you for what both of you are doing. And thank you for She Became Visible and for inviting me here today.
Well, it is our pleasure. And like I said, I love the community that the ex-Mormon is now providing for people that have left the church, because it does give us an opportunity to meet one another and find our gang, our women friends again that we so desperately need, and many reasons why women don't leave the church, even though they're abused and they are not listened to, and their husband is overpowering as far as what he thinks his patriarchal duty is, but they don't want to lose their friends, and they don't want to lose that gang of girls that we so desperately need as women. And I understand that. I really do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So a little bit about me. I grew up on the East Coast. My father is Congressman Owens now. I always knew him as Dad. And I'm hoping that at some point, as my story gets out there, people will say, oh, that's not Burgess's daughter, but that's Summur, that congressman's daughter, kind of thing. You know, it will be reversed. So people will know me first. But for right now, he is the congressman for District 4 in Utah. I do work on his campaign as well. But he and my mother were converts to the church. They, when they met, they were, my father was raised Baptist in Florida during segregation. So it was a Black Baptist church. He said that he didn't even meet a white person until high school.
Wow.
And then my mother grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, and she was raised Catholic. But we have a lot of Hinduism on that side of the family as well, a lot of East Indian. So they both came from a very non high demand faith background, right? When you are Baptist, it's all about being saved by grace. And when you are Catholic, you kind of do the rosary and you do your confessions, and then you can be forgiven. So it wasn't, a lot wasn't asked of them growing up other than a belief in God, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
When they had me, they wanted to find something a little bit more concrete. They revisited the Baptist faith. They revisited the Catholic faith. They didn't find, I believe they didn't find the concrete doctrine that Mormonism or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints offers, where they say, if you do this, you will have that. These other faiths are more, if you believe in God, you'll be saved, or things like that. Just listen to the Pope kind of things. They, I think, gravitate towards the family can be together forever. These are very family values. And they looked at that, and I was 3 years old, and said, this will be a great community for my family and for my children. And I think that is something, you just touched on that a little bit, René, but something that the LDS community does provide is community. And I believe that that's why it's hard for a lot of people to leave. You guys can speak to that as well. I'd love to hear if you agree with that, but it's very difficult to walk away from a community that loves you, you know, that you're there, you feel accepted, right? And so I know that that's what they gravitated towards. And now as an adult, I see why a lot of people have a hard time leaving that. But do you see that as well? Is that your experience as well?
Yes. And the interesting thing is, and I was explaining this to my husband the other day, the difference between Mormonism, I think Mormonism and Judaism are probably closer than Mormonism and Christianity as far as what it means to be a Mormon. It's not just, I believe in Jesus Christ, or I believe in the atonement, which is what they're trying to say now. They're trying so hard to just be a good evangelical Christian church. But when we were growing up, these are our particular doctrines, and they are unique to us, and they are unique because it is the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, the gospel that Jesus created when he was on the earth. And I'm like, and we just went, yeah, because we didn't study the Bible. It was discouraged for us to study the Bible. And so we learned how special we were. And let's see, okay, so you were 3 when your parents joined the church. So was this in the mid 70s?
1983.
Okay, so 83. So the priesthood ban was already gone, and people are
78. Just a couple of years prior. And it's interesting because my father played in the NFL. My mother she would go back and forth, right? So my father played for the New York Jets. So we had a home in New York. when in 1980 he was traded. Back then they didn't have free agency. You were either cut or given to another team. He was traded from the Jets to the Oakland Raiders in California. So I was born in June of 1980, and my dad was actually in camp his first year with the Oakland Raiders in California. My mom had me in New York, and then we went to California and spent time there. But our main base was New York, and then we would kind of be bi-coastal. I would visit family in Trinidad and Tobago. But it's interesting because when my father learned about the LDS Church and my mother learned about the LDS Church, my dad learned about it, just to back up a little bit, because he played for the Oakland Raiders, and Todd Christensen, Mark Wilson as well, was on the team at the time. A lot of people know Todd Christensen. He played for BYU, amazing tight end. But they were both active members, and my dad would kind of look over and see in the locker room how they were different. You know, they didn't go out to drink, they didn't curse, they were very family. But they were not active Mormon missionaries, if that makes sense. They weren't pushing LDS on anybody or the faith on anybody. They just lived their life. And my father saw that. I mean, they were in the Oakland Raiders, right? So it was a completely different environment to see these guys being kind of crazy and knocking people's heads off and drinking and all that. And then Todd and Mark kind of saying, we're going to go home to our families. We're not going to go to the bar. And so my dad saw that and thought, wow, that's amazing. My mother became really good friends with Todd Christensen's wife, Kathy. And so on the other end, my mom was looking for churches, and Kathy had invited her to church one time as well. When she was invited, the boys were out of town. They were at an away game. So my dad actually didn't go when my mom went, but when my mom came home, she called my father and said, this church is amazing. They have like a kids section, and which would be primary, right? A kids section for her. And she just said it just felt like the members and everyone is just so welcoming and loving. Again, the community aspect of it. But they hadn't dug into the doctrine yet. When my dad came back from the away game, I know he ended up being invited by Todd to come over for dinner. And I believe that this was in California. My mom and I were back in New York. So he went by himself, and the missionaries happened to be there. And for dinner, you know, because they were just kind of hanging out in the neighborhood. And so my dad said that he was on a kick to remember people's first names. It was a very big thing for him. So he met the missionaries, and he saw elder, and he thought, wow, this is really easy. Their first names are both elder, you know? But he said that what really struck him was they were so young and had such a love of country, and they were talking about things that at 19 he was very impressed by. They had not gotten into doctrine, but just to talk about the country and you know, just the patriotism, he just thought, wow, these are 19-year-old kids. This is very impressive. So that started their kind of journey. When they started taking the lessons, the lesson on the priesthood ban wasn't to be found. I don't know why, but they did not have that in the lessons. And so my parents actually committed to be baptized. And a few days before their baptism, my father heard about the priesthood ban, which had just happened a few years prior.
Yeah.
He did not know. He had a date to be baptized. And he said, I'm a very proud Black American. I can't be baptized in a faith that did not give this privilege to people of my race just a couple of years ago. And so he said that Todd Christensen came over with a bunch of books to kind of explain why. And nothing he said persuaded my father to get baptized. So the baptism was actually off a few days before.
Wow.
But then Todd had the stake president come over, and they all sat down at dinner, and the stake president said, didn't say anything about the priesthood ban, but said, Burgess, it's interesting. The Lord gives us enough to take the first steps, and then he asks us to take the next step in faith. And for some reason, that was enough for my father to say, there's so many good things here. I think the Lord is asking me to take this next step in faith.
Mm.
And so it's interesting because they did not know about the priesthood ban. We're on the East Coast primarily. When I was being raised in the church, the priesthood ban was never delved into. All we heard was it happened. We don't know why it happened, but it's no longer. That was it. Kind of like polygamy as well. Yes, Lila.
Quick question. So your dad found out about it. You just said they didn't know about the priesthood ban, but they found out before baptism that there was one. But the only explanation was we don't know why. It was just something God told us to do. Or what was it? They didn't get
the
it.
Explanation. So for those that know Todd Christensen, he was extremely intelligent. He was one of those people that was always learning, had a huge vocabulary. What my understanding is that he brought over a ton of books and probably did the whole explanation of the curse of Cain. We don't know why this is something that's in the Bible, probably went down that road. What I know is what helped my father cross that bridge was to say, we don't know, which is something that we hear a lot in the church, right? We don't know.
Right.
We'll know in the next life,
Right.
but we're being asked to take this in faith. When there isn't an answer. So what I think happened was Todd tried to tackle it from the member level of this is what's been said. I don't believe that he brought up Brigham Young's speech or anything like that. I think that it was more, we don't know, but this is what we might, because by the time the priesthood ban was lifted, the church really was trying to separate itself from what was being said prior, right? So from my understanding, it was we don't know, but this is our best guess. Right. And that wasn't good enough. That actually wasn't good enough for my father at the time. It wasn't until it was put kind of in his lap of the Lord has done so much for you. He's shown you so much. You felt this. He's asking you now to take faith. And are you going to do it? And when it's put on our lap, what do you do? Right?
Then it's your faith.
A little sprinkling of shame. Like if
little sprinkling of shame.
And you don't have enough faith, right?
Right.
Have enough faith. Obviously, if you don't do it, you're lacking.
Yeah.
Yes.
You.
And for those if there is anyone listening that doesn't understand or know what this is, and this is something else that I think is very unique to the Mormon Church, is Sammy Davis Jr. was Jewish. There were Black members of that were Jewish that practiced Judaism, and even though there was bigotry and racism in congregations in the South, like you said, that was a personal thing. No one came out and said, "I would love to love you, but Jesus told me I can't." That was just a personal, environmentally cultural thing. But the Mormon Church came right out and said, "Oh no, we would love to accept you, but God said we can't."
But we can't. But
yeah,
we can't.
which I think is so unique. And let me show you, because I thought that was a beautiful segue. Let me show you this little clip, because this it's exactly what Summur's talking about.
Until 1978, no person of color attained priesthood in your church.
Yeah.
Why it took so long time to overcome the racism?
I don't know. I can only say that.
There you go. That's the answer that we were told. Now, then there's other people. Now, President Hinckley, I think this was in 2000. What did they say? Did they give a date on that?
Yeah.
They didn't.
Yeah. So I don't know when this was. I want to say 2002, but one of the things I love about Gordon Hinckley was he was very honest. He didn't try to make up well, it's not up to me. He's like, I don't know. I don't know why we did it, but we don't do it anymore. And let's just not look back. Let's just look forward and do all his conference talks were just do better. Just try. I know you're trying your best. Thank you for doing your best, but please just do better. I really feel like if there was a man that was deceived, it was him. And he just was trying to do his best. But then there were other men that were also considered apostles of God. And they had the answer when they were asked, this is what they would.
Being born in darkest Africa. If that Negro is willing when he...
Let's go back here.
Explained the prejudiced Mormon doctrine that existed in the LDS Church until 1978, which stated that despite their less valiant actions in the premortal life, black people can still accept the gospel and go to heaven, but will only be servants there. He said, this Negro, who in the pre-existence life lived the type of life which justified the Lord in sending him to the earth in the lineage of Cain, with a black skin, and possibly being born in darkest Africa. If that Negro is willing when he hears the gospel to accept it, he may have many of the blessings of the gospel. In spite of all he did in the pre-existent life, the Lord is willing, if the Negro accepts the gospel with real, sincere faith, and is really converted, to give him the blessings of baptism, and the gift of the Holy Ghost. If that Negro is faithful all his days, he can and will enter the celestial kingdom. He will go there as a servant, but he will get a celestial resurrection.
Now, that was in 1954. So, that was during a very culturally bigoted time. But he says it's the absolute assurance that these men use when they deliver these messages. I am an apostle of Jesus Christ. I have the authority to know the truth, and this is the truth. And so when it's delivered like that, then you've got members in 1954 going, okay, well, it's from God.
Can I just say too that, Mark, right? Mr. Peterson there, because he has some gems. He was one of the apostles when I started to research things that really had me start doubting things big time, because this was not a member, right? This was not just a member. This was an apostle. But what I want to say is that was said in 1954, but Apostle Peterson was part of the Quorum of 12 when the ban was lifted. So even though this was said in 1954, he was actually part of the quorum in 1978 when the priesthood ban was lifted. And one of the things that really bothers me about many things, but one of the things that bothers me when people discuss the priesthood ban being lifted is they say that it had to be unanimous.
Yes.
That is a very nice thing to say, but Elder Peterson was actually sent away when the other members of the church, I believe there were two of them that were sent away, but Marky Peterson was definitely one of them. He was sent on a mission or something. He went somewhere when they prayed about this ban being lifted. So he was actually not present. And when they got the confirmation that it needs to be lifted, he was not present. And the understanding is allegedly that they knew that if someone who would say this in 1954 was present in 1978, that he would have said no. Right. So he was not there. And a lot of, LDS historians want to say now, well, or apologists, not historians, well, he did sign it later. Well, yeah, later, after it was announced, after it was said this was what the Lord wanted, he put his name on a piece of paper. But I can't find a single talk where he gets up in conference and either disavows or says the complete opposite of what he said in 1954. So even though it was a very prevalent belief among certain people, not among everybody, because we know about the civil rights era, and there were people that were white that were fighting against these type of bigoted thoughts. It did continue through the late 70s, and it was continuing this thought process of curse of Cain, blacks being less than, did continue through the late 70s. And it is a reason why a lot of people who grew up in the church in that era that are grandparents right now still have this belief.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, this is a wonderful book. I had Matthew Harris on my show. And one of the things it says was church authorities also advocated segregating blood banks at hospitals at practice enforced in certain places in the United States until the 1960s, and in Utah until the late 1970s. Mormon leaders feared that if white members received blood transfused from blacks, it would pollute the purity of the bloodstreams, thereby disqualifying them from the priesthood. That's how far this doctrine went. And they go on to say the leading proponents of segregation within the LDS hierarchy were Church President David O. McKay, First Presidency Counselor J. Reuben Clark, and Apostles Henry D. Moyle, Ezra Taft Benson, Joseph Fielding Smith, Harold B. Lee, and Mark E. Peterson. And it says Mark E. Peterson, born in 1900 in Salt Lake, came of age in a city where blacks were few and far between. He was called in as apostle in 1944, serving until his death in 1984. So he was still practicing as an apostle until the mid 80s. And it's like his colleague Bruce R. McConkie, he favored doctrinal orthodoxy over theological speculation and distrusted LDS intellectuals whom he sometimes targeted for church sanctions. So yeah, exactly what you said. And I was telling Lila that the hold on for a second. Oh, strangled by my thing. So this is the book that took me out. This is a simple biography of David O. McKay. This is not an anti-Mormon book. This was written, the only reason I felt comfortable in reading it was because it was written by Greg Prince, who is an active member of the church. Now, I think he's a PMO. I think he's physically in, but mentally out. And he just doesn't want to admit it. But this book goes into David O. McKay and J. Reuben Clark and Mark E. Peterson and Ezra Taft Benson and talks about exactly what you said, Summur, how when Spencer W. Kimball, decided that, look, if we're going to put a temple in Brazil, we're going to have to give blacks the priesthood. That's the only reason why they did it. It had nothing to do with, kind of revelation of the curse of Cain. It's always about the money, right? And the proselyting and getting more tithe payers. And they sent Mark E. Peterson away, and they did it when he was gone. So this whole idea that the quorum, it's another gaslighting, isn't it? It's another form of gaslighting where they're telling us, we always agree. Everything that says we always agree, and this garbage. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
I remember talking to Lila about this when we went to Bishop Jones when they had the get together, and I was saying that I am seeing that the church creates racists and they create sexists and they just create this environment of bigotry. Yeah. And then when people parrot what that bigotry is, the church wants to stand back and say, we disavow this. We have no idea where they got this from. And the only reason why they disavow it is because the times have changed, right? Because they were very anti-civil rights movement. I remember growing up, even in Pennsylvania, and hearing that Martin Luther King is a communist and not really knowing why I was hearing this in church. They weren't, this was the late 80s, early 90s. So they weren't outright saying that civil rights is bad at this point, right? Now it's accepted and we're all for it now. But I remember them denigrating Martin Luther King and not really understanding why, but saying, well, maybe it's because the church is more of a conservative, politically leaning church, and maybe his views were a little bit more communist or socialist. But now that I look back and I listen to what David O. McKay was saying and Ezra Taft Benson, I'm like, okay, that's what it was. It wasn't just you're a communist. It was, this is a communist movement.
Right.
Desegregation is not of God. And it's just interesting because, like I said, growing up, we never heard about the priesthood ban other than it happened and it's no longer. Just like polygamy. When I grew up, I actually never heard that Joe Smith was a polygamist. I know a lot of people that grew up in Utah, especially if you have Mormon roots, you kind of knew. But for us, we were told it was Brigham Young, and it was because they were crossing the plains and men were dying, and so they had to. Still doesn't make sense. Why would you have to marry them? But either way, that's kind of what we were told through the ranks, right? I never heard it from church leaders, but it was just, anyway. So just like polygamy, it was, we don't really know why, but it happened and we no longer do it. The reason why my journey took a turn was because of the church essays. Just like you just said, René, and I know Lila, you've spoken of this too. It's actually the church's history that is hard for members to hear, not the anti-Mormon.
Yeah.
It's the things that the church actually puts out when you read it. Because, you know, a lot of the times we see a footnote and we just believe that that's what it says, or, you know, they're surmising it for us. When I looked at the church essays and saw race in the priesthood essay, that turned my life upside down. Number one, because I was already married, sealed in the Bountiful Temple. This was around 2015, I want to say, the first time I read it. I'd stumbled upon it. Nobody had told me about it. I don't know how I saw them, but I did see it. And when I read it, the first thing I realized was it wasn't just a priesthood ban. It was a temple ban.
Yeah.
That it wasn't just Blacks can go in the temple and we can get our endowments, but you couldn't get the priesthood for like 10 years. It was Blacks could not, women and men could not be endowed in the temple.
Right.
And the fact that I had just been sealed 5 years prior, in 2010 in the Bountiful Temple to a white man. I mean, we can get into the interracial aspects of that as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But just the fact that as a Black woman, I was allowed to take my own endowments, because, and I'm kind of going back and forth with this, but I had also learned that Joseph Smith had Jane Manning, which the church loves to herald, right? That she was sealed to Joseph as a servant.
Yeah.
But even being sealed as a servant, a white woman had to go in and do the endowment for her.
She couldn't.
So this, I mean,
exactly what we're talking about when we're saying it's not, like you say, it's not the anti-Mormon weirdo stuff you see on TikTok. It is the actual church history that you read and you go, I knew nothing about Jane. And they made that Jane and Emma movie a couple of years ago, and everybody was rushing to the theater and they were showing how much Emma loved Jane. That's the part that they see. Then you go to the statue at This Is the Place monument, where now they have the statues, and they don't tell you that she was sealed to Joseph Smith as a servant. They don't tell you these little parts. And so it's the parts that they leave out that are,
or that even when she was sealed to him as a servant, she could not even get in herself.
Right.
Number two, when I started digging into it, the amount of letters she wrote to the presidency begging to be sealed to her own family. Wow. It wasn't just, can I be sealed to the prophet? Yeah. That is a big apologist thing, was, all these sealings, right? The 14-year-old, this one, it was legacy sealings. It's because they want to be sealed to the prophet. This was someone who, as a Black woman, believed so much in church doctrine that she wanted to be sealed to her family. She wanted to be sealed to her husband.
Of course.
Knew she couldn't be sealed to her husband because her husband could not have the priesthood at this time. It was given during when Joseph Smith was alive, but then Brigham Young took it away. So that was another aspect too. I had never heard of Elijah Abel. Who, for those that do not know who Elijah Abel is, he was one of two, I believe, Black men that received the priesthood before it was taken away. Elijah Abel actually served multiple missions for the church. He was, I believe, a mission president as a Black man. From my understanding, he was really good friends with President Joseph Smith, Prophet Joseph Smith. But then when he died, it turned into this, I'm sorry, when Joseph Smith died, it turned into this thing of, can he keep the priesthood? Did Joseph Smith really give him the priesthood? This is after serving missions. This is after becoming a mission president.
Yeah.
Did he actually give him this priesthood? So it was taken away. And so when I read that in the essay, I just remember sobbing. I literally sobbed because it broke my heart to think of someone having this, being endowed, going to the temple. Again, I'm a temple goer at this time. I'm going to the celestial room. I'm feeling all these feelings. To have that given to you and then to be told, God has actually told us that you shouldn't have it, that it's going to be taken away, broke my heart. It literally broke my heart. And I cried. I remember reading that church essay and crying and saying, what is going on here? Because all I heard was priesthood ban. Black men weren't allowed the priesthood, but they were allowed in the church. They're allowed to be baptized, but it's just the priesthood. And now I'm reading that the most important ordinance that we are taught as members of the church, which is to be sealed as families and that's the only way you can get the highest degree of glory, was said by God, you cannot have that because of the color of your skin. That was something that was very hard for me to take.
Well, and not only that, but like you were saying, there's so much, and it seems, I know it seems trivial to people, but how many, did you guys both hear the story that Brigham Young was sick and laying in the back of the covered wagon, and that they pulled into the valley? He sat up, looked out, and said, "This is the place." Like it was a revelation, right? That's what I heard. That's what I was told. He had no idea where they were going. He just was like, "Look, let's just go, and God will tell us where we're supposed to settle." He sat up and said, "This is the place." Hence, "This is the place" monument, right? Well, then you find out he sent Elijah Abel and all those other guys out there 3 months before to start things. They knew exactly where they were going. And that seems trivial, but that's just part of the layer upon layer of whitewashing the real stories, that when you find out the truth, you go, why didn't you just tell the real story?
I think that's what it is. When I was growing up, my mother used to always say, if someone will lie about something small, they'll lie about something big, right? And so it might seem trivial to people, but when you realize that you are basing your livelihood, your sometimes your vocation, you are putting money, time, so much into an institution, but they're lying to you little by little. And then you find out that the big things are lies as well. It's not as trivial. And I'd love to hear from Lila as well, because I know you have that Mormon legacy, right? You've got that background. So for you, you're hearing, I mean, I'm curious to hear if you heard what we're hearing as well, because you kind of have more of a, and you could talk a little bit about your background, but you have more of a direct connection to the history. So I don't know if you would have heard, I mean, you probably heard that Joseph Smith was a polygamist, because they can't really hide certain things when you're looking at your actual family tree. And, you know, what's going on there. So
Well,
yeah, just here.
First of all, my parents were both converts, so I'm not a legacy. Yeah,
I forgot that.
We didn't have that. So I didn't know. I think I know I heard my dad speaking about it at home with my brother, two of my oldest brothers. They talked about all this stuff that's now in the essays, but if they weren't in the essays, there was not even an internet at that point. I'm talking about when I was younger. They were talking about all these things and about Joseph's wives. And I asked my dad, I called him, pulled him aside one time, and I said, did Joseph Smith practice polygamy? Did he have multiple wives? And he said, well, we don't really know for sure because this is all journals that we found, and people say whatever they want to say. And he said, we don't know for sure, but we think he may have had more than one wife. He didn't tell me 30 wives. It was like very hush hush. I think my dad was sensing that this could be a problem for me, that I might be upset, and that it would cause me to have a whatever you want to call it, a faith crisis. Yeah, tell me, but I found out later, and when I did find out, my dad was dead. He was already gone, and I realized that he knew. He just didn't want me to know.
Because he was a general authority. I don't know whether he would have been a part of any of the meetings up in the upper kingdom but so he knew, he heard, they discuss, they decide up there how they're going to handle this stuff.
He knew the blacks were going to get the priesthood. He knew that because he told a friend of ours, his friend, was it Alan Cherry? There was a black guy who was a really good friend of my family who hung out at our house quite often, a single guy. He had a girlfriend and he wanted to get married to her, and he wanted to be sealed in the temple. So he came over one day, and my dad took him in his office, and they talked, and my mom went in and listened, and she heard my dad promise him that within a year's time he would have the priesthood. And my mom was freaking out. She's like, what are you saying? How you can't tell him that. It was the blessing he gave him. And he said, mark my words, that he will have the priesthood within a year. So he knew they were talking about this. They were talking about it in regards to the temple. They were talking about it in regards to the scouting program, because part of the only way you could get an Eagle Scout for a while there was if in our church, of course we're affiliated with the BSA, but we had our own little rules.
Yes.
And one of them was that you had to be a priesthood holder, and all that. And there's these black boys that were in Boy Scouts and they couldn't get their Eagle. And so they were like, we're going to have to change something. We're going to have to change some rules here. And all this was being talked about. So it wasn't like President Kimball one day prayed and he got the revelation. It was a conversation that they had been having for a while.
Yeah.
Well, I actually did not know that about the Eagle Scout. And for people that don't know, that was a huge part of Mormonism when I was growing up. I mean, it was, Girls Had Mutual, which was the young women program. Young men, I grew up and didn't even realize the Boy Scouts program was something that was separate, because it was so integrated in our faith that I thought it was a Mormon thing growing up. It was just boys go to Boy Scouts. I mean, that's what they do. They get their Eagle Scout and all of that. I had no idea that the priesthood was part of that early on.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and let me give you an example of exactly what Summur's talking about here, and Lila are both talking about the gaslighting and the changing of doctrine, where people just, I don't understand why they don't also have whiplash, where I remember, I resigned my membership from the church about 3 years ago. And I remember, I think before that, when President Nelson gave the talk in conference and said, you women have the priesthood, you've always had the priesthood. And I remember going, Wait, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How? When did that happen? And they act like, well, we've always told you that. What are you talking about? Let me give you an example. Yeah, let me give you an example of that.
That's just crazy.
Okay, wait. That's what I want. That's not what I want. Let me see if I got. Oh, did I get that other one? Oh, I might not have downloaded this one. Okay. All right. Well, let me show you. Let me show this one because this is great. This explains a lot.
I have this section in my hand headed An Act in Relation to African Slavery. I've read it over and made a few alterations. I will remark with regard to slavery. Inasmuch as we believe in the Bible, inasmuch as we believe in the ordinances of God.
Ages, history attests.
Oh, there
Okay,
was.
Let me go back to Brigham.
Priesthood and order and decrees of God, we must believe in slavery. This colored race have been subjected to severe curses, which they have in their families and their classes, and in their various capacities brought upon themselves. And until the curse is removed by him who placed it upon them, they must suffer under its consequences. I am not authorized to remove it. I am a firm believer in slavery. Now, to the case before us with regard to slavery. With regard to slaves that are Africans, or that are English, or that are Dutch, or ourselves, I go in for making just such laws as we want upon that matter, independent of any other nation under the heavens. Let us do that which will bring about what we want to be done, regardless of the abuses of despotic governments.
Now, this to me, there are so many things in this little speech. The whole idea that Mormons, and we'll go back up to one of Mark Peterson's, but that America was chosen by God to be the promised land, that it is the chosen nation for the second coming of Jesus Christ, and that America is everything, and for him. And then this was carried on by Ezra Taft Benson, and it's being revitalized right now by the Christian nationalist movement, where America is the chosen land. But so this is Brigham Young, and I told Lila in one of our other podcasts, my husband is still a true believing member, so we were down in St. George, and of course you have to do the Dixie tour. And so we're going to Brigham Young's house, and we're going to these different places. And this sweet little missionary lady is giving the tour, and she's saying, now, we call it Dixie because of, we tried to raise cotton down here, and there were never any slaves or anything like that. But I mean, that's just where we got the name. And I was like, oh, you don't know. You haven't been told yet, And there, she wasn't alone. I mean, there's a lot of these women in that older demographics that were taught by people like Marky Peterson and Gordon Hinckley and this guy that this was the whitewash version. That's all they know. So listen to this.
Contemporary critics have pressed church leaders to modify a decree of the Lord, but such is eternal law, and it cannot be altered.
It is the decree of God that the mark shall remain upon the seed of Cain, and the curse, until all the seed of Abel should be redeemed. And Cain will not receive the priesthood until, or salvation until, all the seed of Abel are redeemed.
All worthy male members of the church may be ordained to the priesthood without regard for race or color.
So what's going on here? Critics, as Russell M. Nelson called them, were indeed pressing for the priesthood ban to be revoked. So did church leaders submit to this pressure to modify the law of the Lord? Let me know what you think.
So he's saying, look, again, it's not our fault. This came from God. Brigham Young was told by God that they should put this ban on the priesthood, and there's nothing we can do about it, and stop talking about it. So, but that was
because each is a child of God. Each is equal in his eyes.
I can't get over this.
The implications of this truth are profound. Brothers and sisters, please listen carefully to what I'm about to say. God does not love one race more than another. His doctrine on this matter is clear. He invites all to come unto him, black and white, bond and free, male and female.
Wow.
I'm just going to
I
choke.
mean,
History attests.
Let me get rid of that. Yeah. So there's the gaslighting right there.
To be fair, Brigham Young did say that they would have no problem baptizing the Negro. It's just that they will never, ever be more than a servant in the kingdom. So it's just interesting because, right, he's saying, well, we accept everybody. Well, Brigham Young did say that in that speech. He does say later on, we accept everybody. You can come over, but we, if you are Black, you will never hold office in the government land, whether in Utah or any other state. So middle finger to you, Brigham Young, because I got my father elected. But it's just, it's very difficult to hear because my problem is that we are constantly told it is the members and that it is a cultural thing. And the question then becomes, well, where did it stem from? Where did the culture come from? Where did these members get it from? And we are taught as Latter-day Saints that you do what is right, let the consequence follows, and the part of repentance is to apologize for what is done and seek to, you know, give the person some type of I'm trying to think of the word, not retribution. You ladies know what I'm talking about, but you have to, yes, remission. There's some, you have to, you know, to restore them from what you've taken, right?
Yeah, you have to acknowledge what you did. You have to apologize, and then you have to change your behavior. And then you can repent.
What you took away.
Right.
Exactly. You cannot just change your behavior. We are, as members of the church, we are not allowed to just change your behavior, right? If I'm doing something that is against what the church says that I'm allowed to do, I cannot just stop. I have to repent of it. I have to acknowledge that I did it. And then I have to, right. And I have to, if I've hurt somebody, I have to go to that person and acknowledge that I have hurt them. I am very bothered that the leaders of this church will not follow what the member at the lowest level, my son, who was baptized at 8, who is 9 now, is asked to do. The church leaders will not do that. I do not want to go to a B1 event, which is the event that the church put on a few years ago to celebrate the lifting of the priesthood ban. I don't want to sit there, which I was there, and hear how we don't know why God did this. Yeah. God is just racist. We're not sure. But what we do know is that it wasn't that Blacks were not valiant in heaven. We do know, this is what's in the essay as well, the church essay. We know that it wasn't the curse of Cain. Well, then why were members of the church that were leaders of this church telling the other members of this church that that's what it was?
Right.
Yeah.
Marky Peterson said it was because we were less valiant in the war in heaven, period.
Right.
Brigham Young, we will probably listen to that speech a little bit later. He straight out said, this is God's will. And people can disagree with me, but then you're disagreeing with God. Yeah. So don't say that it is, we don't know where it came from. We know where it came from. Nemo, who we just played, Nemo the Mormon can help you find it if you have a hard time finding where it came from. Yeah. But it came from the church leaders. And that's okay if we no longer believe that. But then let's acknowledge, let's apologize, and let's change the behavior. Let's not gaslight and say we have no idea where this came from. And if you say it was from us, you're lying, because that's wrong.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And let's just show this just as a...
August 27th, 1954. He explained his prejudiced view that the Lord approves of and uses segregation. He said, "The Lord segregated the people, both as to blood and place of residence. At least in the cases of the Lamanites and the Negro, we have the definite word of the Lord himself, that he placed a dark skin upon them as a curse, as a punishment, and as a sign to all others. He forbade intermarriage with them, under threat of extension of the curse, and he certainly segregated the descendants of Cain when he cursed the Negro as to the priesthood, and drew an absolute line. You may even say he dropped an iron curtain there.
And not only is that frustrating, but it's that is going on right now, where they're saying we never said that there was a dark skin put upon them as a curse.
Oh, yeah,
We
with
said
the
it was
tattoo.
a spirit. That's the double talk that's going on.
Unbelievable. That it doesn't mean skin. We're not talking about skin. Oh, really? Oh, read what everyone else has said.
Not only read, right? But especially as converts, my parents bought all the church little Book of Mormon stories books, because we weren't raised with all these things. My parents bought all of those things. And in the back it says, from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And guess what? The Lamanites were darker in those illustrations than the Nephites were. So, I mean, there's so much proof of this gaslighting and this, but I think what's most important too is just, and John Dylan talks about this all the time, but informed consent. Yes. I actually do not care what people do with the knowledge they have, as long as they have the knowledge.
Right.
And I married my husband, who is white, from Utah. He's still a believing member, just like René. So he is TBM as well, true believing member. But I married him in 2010. Had no idea that President Kimball had talked about interracial marriage or dating. Had no clue until after we got married. Then I am doing more research recently, and I'm seeing Brigham Young. This went back to Brigham Young's era, where he says, this is a curse of Cain. They are not allowed the priesthood. And if you intermingle with the curse of Cain or blacks, then, they called him Negro then, with the black race, then you are allowed to kill them and their children. So I now have 3 children being raised in a church that in the 1800s said that it would be okay for our neighbor to kill not only me, not only my husband, but my 3 children.
Yes.
Right. Well, and that was perfect, because I wanted to talk about that. It says, one of the underlying forces behind the church's support of segregation policies in Utah and in the United States was interracial marriage. The Mormon hierarchy feared that if segregation laws ended, whites and blacks would mix and thereby marry, adhering to a theology of racial superiority that emphasized chosen lineages over cursed ones. So when you guys, were planning, was there any backlash from his family in Utah? Was there anyone that said, honey?
So my husband is, he was an only child. Both of his parents have passed. He does come from legacy. His mother has traced pioneer legacy. Interestingly enough, and I wish she was still alive when I met Sandra Tanner, but her family is related to the Tanner side. They have Tanner. So when I heard Sandra Tanner and I heard about who they were, she had already passed. And I'm like, dang it, because I would have loved to sit down and talk to them about, Sandra and her husband. But she was very faithful to the end of her life. They grew up inactive, but I did not hear anything about race there being an issue at all. I will say, growing up, I knew of somebody who was black as well, but she was a darker complexion. And this other woman had 2 sons. The one son was the same age as myself, and the other son was the same age as my friend, who was darker complexion. And the mother did not want the younger son to date my friend. Mm-hmm. She pushed the older son on me, and I wasn't interested. But I always remembered that and thought, why was there such a discrepancy, right? Because we're both black. But why is there this discrepancy? And I also remember my friend telling me, because my friend and the younger son liked each other. So they did start dating. And I remember her telling me that the mother took her aside and said, what about your children? Your children are going to have a hard time, which I heard later in the church, that this whole thought. There was a lot of colorism I found as I was growing up. And the reason I think for that is because there was no longer this iron curtain, as Marky Peterson said, of you cannot mix with that race because you just don't know now, right? That's why when we were talking about the Brazilian temple, there was this problem with, well, is it one drop rule? How can we tell if there's an African descent? How do we tell this person they can't, right? Because now there's so much intermixing that you now can only go off the complexion of somebody's skin. Yeah. This mother literally was saying, because my complexion was lighter, she actually didn't have a problem. So and I don't know if I meant they were white, the family was white, but my friend who had a darker complexion, it was more noticeable. Yeah. So this was in the 90s. This was 96, 97. Yeah. And this was on the East Coast. So it wasn't, and she wasn't from the East Coast. The family wasn't from the East Coast. But looking back now, I'm like, that is where you got that from. Because you're growing up in this era of being told, do not mix. Right. Interracial marriage is wrong. Well, what happens when society doesn't do what the prophet is saying to do, right? What happens when society isn't Mormon? Well, they're having interracial marriages. Right. And so now, as a church member, what do? Well, you start looking at the complexion of the skin, and colorism becomes a big thing. The other thing that I started learning was about the whole Lamanite connection, right? That their skin complexion is darker, and you had apostles in the 60s, 70s, and I think as late as the 80s saying that children who were Native American, their skin color was lightening because they were accepting the gospel, that the children were becoming lighter than the parents. Yeah. So there's not just a racism of black, white, right? Or there is a colorism that I did not even realize is prevalent within the doctrine, where it's not just you are a black race or you are Native American. It is very much dark skin, light skin, even within the races. Sorry, I'm my thing.
Well, and even like I have a friend who her mom is probably my age, and she married a man from New Zealand. And her parents were all up in arms because they were like, you can't intermarry. And she's like, well, I am. And so there you go. But so, even an island person with a white person was discouraged, and I understand that this was cultural. I understand that there was a lot of prejudice culturally, but the problem is you cannot, and Marky Peterson is really big on this. I think he's the one that set the standard for the belief that the apostles actually see and converse with Jesus, because he mentions that quite a bit. So you can't on one hand say, I am talking with Jesus in the temple every Thursday afternoon, and this is the new doctrine, and then go, it was just cultural. Good old Jeffrey Holland, the culture's here, and then we're here. And then we're here.
A lot going up.
It's like he just said that out loud. I don't know if he knew that he just said that out loud, but talk a little bit about, so now where at this point, so now your parents, now it's past all that. They've been in the church for a long time. They're aware of all of this. And I love the picture. I can't remember if it was on Bill and RFM, but I love the picture of you doing Trek, and you're with all these white kids, and you got on your Pioneer stuff, and you're like, this is great. I am loving this, And I remember going, I am so glad that she was as naive as we were.
No, listen, I was the stereotypical, we were very active, and being on the East Coast, we drove 2 hours to church. our stake our stake conference was maybe 2.5 hours away. And so, and our temple, we're in New York, Pennsylvania. The closest temple was in Washington, D.C. That's where we were sealed as a family. So we were committed. My family was committed. They were a very active, we went to church every Sunday type of family. But because of the convert background, there wasn't this underlying, we're the only ones, we are the chosen ones, this is the only church.
Yeah, in your family, you didn't believe that.
In my family, my little family, we were taught at a church, but for some reason, my parents were able to foster this environment where we would hear it at church, but we would come home, and it wasn't this it didn't stick. Doctrine, it didn't indoctrinate us. Right. And I think it's too because my whole family are non-members, extended, right? My grandmother ended up getting baptized in the temple. Baptized, and then ended up getting endowed in the temple. I have an uncle. A lot of my family members on my mom's side did convert, but they were very island conversion, where I have an uncle who said, I'm a drinking Mormon. I mean, he had a beer all the time. And I love that because this was someone who DJ'd my graduation, and it was just my family. I mean, I didn't have like a ton of friends that came over. It was like, my uncle comes up, he's like, we'll have a party in your basement. And he would drive down from Brooklyn and stop at the liquor store. And we had beer in our fridge just because Uncle Eddie is in town for the weekend. But we didn't drink. My dad never touched beer after converting, even staying in the NFL. He completely turned his life to Mormonism. But we were in an environment where we were not just taught, but saw everyone has their own walk of life. And we accept that walk of life, and they connect with God however they connect with God. But this is the way that we're choosing to connect with God. So it was a very
so were you guys like in your ward though? Were you guys the only people of color in the ward? I mean, because that's a great thing about the East Coast, was it's more diverse.
And that's the thing. We were one of few Black families. But there were a lot of Spanish. There's a lot of island. It wasn't of color. There were a lot of people of color in the different wards that we went to. I grew up in New York, then we moved to New Jersey, and then we moved to Pennsylvania. It was still predominantly white, but I wasn't going to church feeling like I'm not seeing people that are different complexion, right? And if there was racism, it was a very, it wasn't so blatant because there were so many people of color, right? Right. So it wasn't like we're doing this to just Summur, right? It was, we're doing this to this group of kids and we don't really know why, but whatever, kind of thing. But it's interesting because I was just talking to my mom. My grandmother passed last June, and we were talking about her life, and she was buried in her garments, her temple clothing. She was endowed, but she remarried. My maternal grandfather passed away when I was like 5. She remarried when I was in high school, and she remarried to a Jewish man from Israel. He is not Orthodox, right? But he is Jewish, because in the Jewish faith, it doesn't matter if you're Orthodox or not. If you're Jewish, you're Jewish, which is what I love about that faith. And then my grandmother at 60 something had twins. So I actually had an uncle who are my uncle actually just graduated yesterday, but they're the same age as my baby sister, who is 30. So holy
cow.
Imagine
that was a thing. Wow.
Yeah. So my step grandfather, sorry, grew up. He's Jewish, and he raised their children Jewish, but in a very non-traditional way, right? So they didn't do. My grandmother would still have. They would have all the Jewish holidays, which were amazing, but they did not. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, but like they grew up in the Jewish faith, but it was not the Orthodox Jewish faith, right?
Right.
So they would still have like a cheeseburger, possibly, right?
Yeah.
But
Ham
they
sandwich.
believed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But they believed in Judaism. My grandfather did. My step grandfather did. My grandmother still went to church, went to the LDS church. She would go by herself. She had the missionaries over. But my mom and I were just talking about this because when she would have like a Jewish holiday, she'd invite the missionaries over and they would have red wine. And it was very much a environment. They live in New York. Very much an environment of, we have the non-alcoholic beverages here. We have the alcoholic beverages here. If you don't feel comfortable, we'll make you a plate and you can go. But this is who we are, right? Yeah. So it was we respect other cultures and we want to embrace other cultures, but that doesn't threaten my faith and my culture. My grandmother did that.
Yeah, that's the Abrahamic, the Islam, Mormonism, Judaism. This is where the parents are ranting their clothing and crying and disowning because you've married someone that's not, my parents, we grew up Methodist when my aunt, joined Catholicism. Then she switched to being to a Lutheran. We didn't care. We don't care if you go to Methodist church or you're Catholic or you're Lutheran or you're Baptist. Yeah. As long as you believe in Jesus, we're good. So it's only the Orthodox Abrahamic religions. So tell us, let's finish this up with, so you're married to a white guy. You've got 3 mixed race children. You're active in the church. You're temple attending. You read the gospel doctrine. You read the gospel topics essays. And you're like, what? And yeah. And how long did it take? And what kind of controversy did this bring into the home? And now your children are young.
Yeah.
So you have now worked out a program. So talk a little, tell our listeners how this works or how this can work.
Okay. I don't want to say I worked out a program because I'm still a hot mess, minus the mess, triple the mess, minus the hot. I'm still figuring this out, right? But I do want to say that because of my upbringing, I didn't even know what a nuanced member was. I thought everybody was this way, but I was very nuanced anyway, and so was my family. So even though I was sealed in the Bountiful Temple, as soon as we were done our sealing, we had gotten a really nice site and we had a ring ceremony. And so, I'm now finding out like years later after we did this, that ring ceremonies were even like discouraged and not done in Utah, right? It takes away from the sealing. I did not know that. And I'm grateful for a husband who was not in that thinking, was not orthodox enough to say, no, we need just have a sealing and then, a traditional reception. He allowed me to have 90% of the people there flew in that were my friends and things like that. They were not members ever. They were either never Mormon or inactive. And so I was still able to have a full-on wedding without and a dinner and all of that, so that people did not feel out of place at all. It just made sense to me. So this is 2010 when that happens. Fast forward to 2015. I just want people to understand I was not this orthodox black and white member when I'm reading this essay. I'm very nuanced. I was raised that if the prophet says something, take it home and pray about it. That's how my parents raised me. This whole, once the prophet speaks, the debate is over. I never heard that growing up. In church, they may have said that, but my parents made sure that when we got home, it was all about personal revelation. So when I'm reading this essay, it's turning my world upside down, because it is something that is so now black and white. This is what was being said. Again, I never heard any reasons for the priesthood ban, but I'm reading in this essay now, we didn't say that you were less valiant. We didn't say it was the curse of Cain. And I'm thinking, wait, whoever said that we were less valiant? Yeah. It's like they were kind of telling on themselves, right? I'm like, wait, this is what members actually were saying. And then I'm doing more digging. So in 2015, I read this essay. I remember crying. I remember calling one of my sisters, who is just as nuanced as me, an active member. And we talked a lot about it. And I remember praying and getting this feeling of, you know, I don't know why, but maybe I'll find out later, but just know that everything else is all good, right? That kind of feeling of don't worry about it now. Fast forward to 2018. For some reason, I pick up the essay again. I don't even remember why. I'm active. I'm now in a wonderful ward, Polynesian ward, and I look at the essay again. And what stood out to me was the Brigham Young sentence. They say, even all this day of the priesthood ban being lifted was prophesied by Brigham Young. And they had a footnote there. And it stood out to me because Brigham Young has said some things. And I was thinking, he said that it would be lifted. So I followed that footnote. And that's where I got to the speech that we played earlier. And I read it. And it was one of the most abhorrent things I've ever read in life, let alone within the LDS context.
Right.
It was so despicable. And the fact that we actually played it, we played a clip of it, but it says that what Brigham Young said, sorry, I'm trying to think. He said that no one, the curse of Cain will not be lifted until everybody else, all other races, receive the priesthood, right? So he's talking about like the millennium. But the church took that little thing and put it in the essay to say that he did prophesy that one day this would happen. And that's when the spiral started, the spiral of, wait a minute, let me actually start looking at footnotes. Let me actually start reading what's being said, because the church is telling me that Brigham Young prophesied that this day was going to come. But when you read what he said, he is not saying that Spencer W. Kimball in 1978 is going to lift this ban. And the fact that they put that in there bothered me. And that's when the whole, that's what opens up the can of worms, right? Because once you start seeing a little bit of deception, you're like, wait a minute, what else? What else are you not being completely?
It's like this. Lila, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say it's a spiral. Is because you realize you just got gaslit because you know what they actually said, and now they're twisting it to fit this new narrative, and they're not telling you the real narratives. Then it's like, oh my gosh, they've been lying. What else did they lie to me about? Yeah. And then all you have to do is go on the internet and ask a question, and you get it all
like a sweater, right? You pull that thread. And the sweater just
It's like the again, the rock in the hat. That seems so trivial. Everybody watching Russell Nelson demonstrate how he put his face in the hat, and everyone's going, well, I never knew that, but and I was not taught that. And the pictures I have hanging in my house of Joseph Smith and the golden plates do not depict that. But okay. And I remember reading that and coming out of my bedroom, and my husband's in the family room, and I remember going, did you know, Bishop Stillman, that and he's like, what are you talking about? He didn't know that either. That's another pile. You're just making this pile of craziness.
I think the worst is when you talk to a member and they say, no, I always knew that.
Yeah,
that is the worst.
We were talking
That's
about
the worst, because I will tell you, because I was raised in New York primarily, my whole like primary and young, and then we moved to Pennsylvania. We were close to Palmyra, so our youth conferences would be to go up to the Hill Cumorah, and I loved. We would watch the pageant. We would go to the Grove. There were anti-Mormon literature people. Again, like Lila said, this is before the internet. They had booklets, and they would say Joseph was a polygamist. There was a rock and a hat. And I vividly remember being told, do not ever read what they are saying. It is not true. It was through divine blah, 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 blah. There's no rock and a hat. And I remember seeing that South Park episode and saying, they do not know the LDS faith. What are they talking about? A rock and a hat. I remember so much fighting this, like, what are you talking about? Yeah. And then now I get to see the current prophet with a hat, looking in a hat. Yeah. And it's like, wait, what? 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 What is happening?
You cannot. So 2018. So now, I mean, this is a lot of times past. Have you resigned your membership from the church? Actually, had you recommended it?
No, I have not, and I did not in 2018. And 2018 was when the cycle started, you know, right. and I started talking to my husband, which a lot of people do, right? Yeah. They make the mistake of, you know, oh, blah, 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 blah. You'll never guess what I found out.
I still do.
And yeah, and he I still feel very badly about how I came to him about it, because this is my husband, my eternal companion. I tell him everything. And I am now ripping the rug from underneath him on everything that he holds dear.
Yeah.
And I wasn't doing it purposefully. I don't think any of us ever do.
No.
We are just finding out things, and we feel as though the person closest to us will feel the same way, right? Like, wow, these are lies. So this is 2018. I remember having him read a couple of essays with me. He read the Book of Abraham essay with me. We were in London, UK. And I said, would you mind just reading an essay with me? And he read that one with me. And I remember him thinking or saying, this is a little odd that they're saying that Joseph didn't translate it. But then he kind of put it on a shelf, his own shelf. And he just would not talk to me about the things that I was finding out.
Yeah.
I say to this day, if he was more open, I don't think my deconstruction would have happened as fast as it did, to be completely honest. Yes. I think if he humored me, if he listened more, I would have stayed more nuanced. But because he wasn't listening, I needed to get to the bottom. And so I just kept going on the internet, and I kept finding more and more stuff. And there was no bottom, as we now know. Yeah. Yeah. There's no bottom. You don't come back up from it, right? No. You just end up.
Well, and you know why, Summur? It's because they don't understand. I want so badly to take this little thing here called a laptop over to Salt Lake and open it up and go, I want to introduce you guys to Google. I don't know if you know this or not, even though you own stock and a very high profile of stock that you hold in this. Do you understand that you cannot hide this anymore? And Chad Daybell, watch the Chad Daybell. You can't hide anything anymore. They've got your freaking text. They've got where you were located. You can't hide. It's not 1960. It was beautiful.
The Chad Daybell was, not to get off subject, but that was the first time it hit me that they are recording when we go to the temple, which might sound dumb.
Yeah.
But every time we're putting that thing in, right? Yeah. I know that I thought, they're just checking to make sure that we are current.
Yeah.
In those trial, that is when they said Chad Daybell came in on whatever date at 10:01, and here's Lori. She came in at 10:02, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What?
This is in those caves out there in Utah.
Scary. Yeah. I mean, that was scary to me to see that not just, okay, make sure that they're being current and they're going. They had timestamps of when these two were going. And the fact that they were, you know, certain murders were happening before and after temple visits. So not to get off topic, but you are absolutely correct. The media, the internet, and I'm not surprised that they're behind the times and they don't realize it, because if you look at the civil rights movement, you look at Blacks in the priesthood, they're always behind the times, right?
But I mean,
they're always trying to catch up.
Saying, oh, you know, you can Google, and if you don't like the answer, you can keep Googling it until you get the answer that you want. So they're trying to even gaslight us there. It's like, not really. I can Google historical truths. I can find out that there is an Egypt, there was a pharaoh. And if I Google it 50 million times, you're going to go, no, there is an Egypt. There is a pharaoh. You know, so these historical truths, this is not like, but they're still trying to tell people, you know, Google is just lying. It's all just a lie.
Why
can't you say, Lila?
Why can't they? This is what drives me nuts. You know, it's like, how could they fix this? Knowing that it's out there, their cover is blown.
Yeah.
You can't pretend anymore.
Yeah.
So why don't they just say these words instead of Nelson getting up and saying, we accept all races and all people, Black or white, male, female. Why don't they then say, we recognize that we didn't back in, you know, up until 1978, we didn't. And we are sorry because we were wrong.
Exactly.
Why don't they just say those simple words? That would heal a million wounds if they would say we were wrong.
And
it was racism. It wasn't God. It was us.
And it would slow the exodus. Not just heal wounds, but it would slow the exodus.
Yes, it would.
If the leadership were to take accountability, do you know how many people that are currently looking to leave that would say, this is a different church, they're taking it, and use that to stay?
Right.
But because they're not, I mean, I look at the November 2015 policy. This was around the time that I was reading the church essay. And I remember going to my husband and saying, what is this? What are they doing? Like, men should not be punished. Men shall be punished for their own sins, not for Adam's transgression. That is an article of faith. Why are they now saying that families that are in the LGBTQ community, their children cannot be baptized in the church?
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember my husband saying, he was telling me about, you know, love, and they don't want to, you know, divide the families and all of that. But he said, Summur, this has been a policy with the polygamous families for decades. I did not know that.
I didn't know that either. I remember hearing a guy say, what are you guys all upset about? It's been my life. And I remember going, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so he told me that. And it was kind of one of those like shattering moments where I'm thinking, okay, if the church has been doing this to this group of people, then I guess they can do this to another group of people and try to explain. But then they turned it around a few years later.
Yeah.
And it's this whiplash effect that we were talking about earlier, right? Where 1 minute you're being told something by leadership, the community, the members are now parroting it. But then when the leadership turns and changes their mind, the membership is still saying it.
Yeah.
And then they're now blaming the members and saying, well, the gospel is perfect, not the members. Well, hate to break it to you, it's the members that the reason why people still go.
Right.
That's why we have PMO. That's why that's a term, physically and mentally out. Because people want that community. They love their neighbors. It's actually, they know they're not perfect, but they're looking and they're saying, this is what makes the church great. It's actually not the leadership that's making the church great.
Or the doctrine.
Or the doctrine. Or the doctrine.
You know?
So where I was in 2018 and 2019 was I realized that my husband was not in a place. He was literally a wall when I would talk to him about these things. Literally, I mean, I would say something to him and he would stop talking And I would say, did you hear this? Did you hear about this SEC thing? And he would stop talking and let me finish. And then he would get up and just go out of the room. And I would say, I guess that's the end of the conversation. And that is what the church did. The church made it so that someone who I am the closest to on this earth, I cannot talk to about the biggest things that were going on in my life. So in 2019, I started looking at other communities. I didn't even know there was a Reddit. I didn't know who John DeLynn was. I had found some old RFM Bill Reel things when Bill Reel was still believing. I had found those. So I was listening to those. So my deconstruction was fast because from November 2018 to March 2019, I was like this, I don't believe the truth claims anymore. But I was able to, in my marriage, slow it down because I found community in you guys. I went to, Bill Reel came to Alpine in
that's where we met. That's where
yes. We were at Sandra Tanner's party too. We were there too. But we met at the Bill and Amanda Reel had come to Alpine. That was the first time I had met. I mean, that was the first post-mo anything I'd gone to. I was terrified. I remember because it was just me. I asked my sister if she can watch the kids, and I just walked into this place. I knew nobody other than the fact that like Lila looked like a celebrity to me. Bill Reel was a celebrity to me, like all these celebrities because I'd seen them on these podcasts. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm here. I don't know how I'm going to be accepted. I don't know if I have to be like very Exmo to be here. I didn't know. And I've actually never shared this. John DeLynn was there. I spoke to everybody. It was amazing. I remember, sorry, I'm going to get emotional. I remember leaving. I've never shared this. I left the event. We were there for a few hours. I left the event and I went in the car and I just cried because it was so welcoming. And when you're in a space where you're losing everything, you don't know if God is real anymore. You don't know anything. Everything that you based your life on is gone. And you're walking into this space of people who have been through what you're going through or are going through it right now. I went to that car and I just cried because it was so freeing to be in a space of people who are not going to judge, who are saying, I know this is hard. I know this is hard. And this was the same time that I'm not talking to my husband, right? I'm not talking to my husband about it. I'm not talking to my family about it. And I'm going to this event. I don't know how these people are going to be. It was amazing. And then I went to Sunstone. And that Sunstone was that summer. It was the first time I'd ever gone to Sunstone. Again, I went by myself. And that's where I met you, René, and I saw you again, Lila. And it was more than one way to Mormon. And to meet polygamists, to meet Exmo, to meet current members. Oh my gosh, it was so reaffirming, so amazing. For anyone out there who has not been to Sunstone, who anywhere you are on your journey, it doesn't matter if you are TBM or if you have left and you don't want to hear the name Nelson ever again. Sunstone is an amazing place to just have a sense of community and realize that you can accept people where they are and be welcoming. And so that was my first event after the Bill Reel event, where I went to Sunstone, and I just started creating a community outside of my marriage, so that I could give my husband the space to handle the fact that he is losing what he was promised in in December of 2010. We mentioned my mom earlier and my stepfather.
Yeah.
His name's Blair Underwood. He is amazing.
Not Wayne Brady.
Christian.
I don't know if Blair can sing as well as Wayne Brady. I kind of have a crush on Wayne Brady.
He can do everything. My Uncle Blair can do everything. But he's someone who's been in my life all my life. I literally, when I was a baby, my mom and he became best friends. So all my life I've called him Uncle Blair, and I've had to let people know, like, we're not really related.
Yeah.
But I remember having deep conversations with him and my mother as my deconstruction was happening. And I remember him saying to me, just remember, you dated people who are not members of the church before you met your husband, but your husband only dated members of the church.
Right.
So just keep in mind that he is losing something that he had felt like he was going to always have, in the sense that you're losing your faith. And it was he's a never Mo. My Uncle Blair is a never Mormon. He just knows Mormonism through us. But it was such a pivotal moment for me to understand and recognize that he's going through his own thing too. Yeah. And I need to be respectful of the fact that it is a very hard, real thing. But I also have to be kind to myself and know that being quiet isn't going to work for me. Yeah. So how do I balance those two things where I have a husband? He hasn't seen a single one of my podcasts. I just did John DeLynn. I think it was 4 hours, 5 hours, whatever that was, because John has me there for a while. Yeah. My husband has not watched it.
My husband doesn't listen to mine either. And it's funny because he'll listen to At Last She Said It with Susan Hinckley and but he doesn't listen to mine. And I'm like,
really?
Oh, there you go.
Really?
And I feel like they think more about the church than we do, but they just, but they're like that whole, we're nuanced members, so we're going to bitch about it, but we're still members, so everybody's still,
Right. And that's the thing. Yes, Lila, go ahead.
Thinking about both of you and René are in the same boat in this area. You have TBM husbands, and you're both outspoken podcasting women. And you're a politician, I mean, so to speak, Summur, so you've got this other life, and that would be tricky. That would be tricky to manage because, as of TBM, you're supposed to be one with your mate, and go on for the eternities. And if you can't agree on, who God is, or if there is an eternity, or, anything else having to do with religion, that would be. I have now, my boyfriend is a Black never Mo, and I've been dating him for quite a while. I've known him since junior high. So one of my friends, and it's nice because when I was still going to church, he was in the picture, but he was like biting his tongue all the time. And that's how I think it would be for you guys, is you want to say something and you better just rein it in, bite your tongue. You don't want to start World War III, but it's like, but you really should know this because you don't know it, and you're living this, you're going to a church that takes your whole life. It's not just a Sunday church, takes your whole life. It affects your whole life, and it's built on lies. And that's so hard to just choke that back and not say what you want to say. So I got to give you kudos, man. That's got to be hard.
Yeah. But I don't have young children at home. Summur, what are the ages of your children?
So my daughter is, my youngest is 7. She will be 8 this coming Saturday. My son is right in the middle. He's 9. He just turned 9 in March. And my oldest is 11, and she'll be 12 in November.
So you've got some milestones coming up that are going to cause a
Yeah.
little bit of discussion,
Are you
right?
gonna go ahead and baptize the youngest? Is that on the docket?
So it is on the docket to have her be baptized. It's difficult because their ages are so close, and the other two were baptized, right?
Oh.
And so my son, when I was going through this, but I hadn't like been done, was baptized while I was kind of going through this. So now you've got his younger sister who's right behind him, and then the question becomes, there's so many questions, right? But questions become of how would she feel if mommy says I don't want you to get baptized, but the other two are.
Yeah.
The question of what happens with my husband, because he does believe that this is a ordinance.
Yeah.
So it's at that point where they're what was that? Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, I want there to be given enough time to be able to explore where I am with my husband, right? And we are in an amazing place. We really are. He, it's Sunday right now, and I told him I had a podcast at noon, and so he took the kids to church. And knowing that I'm doing a podcast, and he's okay with that. He doesn't know which one, he doesn't know what I'm talking about because he doesn't want to know those things. But we are in a really good place where I can at least let him know that I am speaking out about what I feel, because he understands that he's not in that place. And he did tell me that when I just did the Mormon stories. He had a cousin that reached out to him and said, hey, Summur did a great job on part 1. I can't wait for part 2. And he just said, yeah, that's wonderful. And I said to him, it's hard for me because I am telling people my life. I'm being very vulnerable, and I can't even tell you what I'm doing. And he said, I understand and recognize that. And I promise I will be in a place at some point to have this discussion with you, just not there yet. And so as long as we're having that conversation where I'm not sneaking off and saying, okay, René, Lila, let's talk now. And he's not sneaking off and saying, oh, my wife, why is she? We're still there where we're not talking about the hard things yet, but he knows that I am in a place where I need to be able to talk and speak. And when it comes to our children, we trust each other, right? Yeah, so when he is in the room with my daughter, and she has a question that's theological, I trust that he is not going to take her off the deep end. But then he also goes to work, and he knows that my daughter, my eldest especially, will have questions. He is not thinking she's going to take my daughter off the deep end. So there is a trust there that we are still being respectful of each other's beliefs of where we are. But there are some core things where I've put my foot down. One of those is tithing, the SEC thing. And I think that he'd be okay with me discussing this because it is something that we've talked about often. But I am not okay with tithing 10% to downtown Salt Lake.
Yeah.
He is a believing member. He's not okay. I mean, some mixed faith marriages, they can do 5%. He believes in 10%. That's it. And so we've had a discussion and have talked to our bishop, who I am in an amazing Polynesian ward. If I was not in a Polynesian ward, I would not be attending at all. And my children would not be attending. Yeah. I do want to say that. But we sat down with our bishop and spoke about tithing 10% on a local level so that our tithes go to our bishop. It goes into the fasting area. They're tithing 10%, but it goes directly to our ward. And so I know there are people in our ward that need help, and I know the bishop can help them with our tithes.
Yeah.
My husband did not know that the tithes go to Salt Lake and stay in Salt Lake. He thought they go to Salt Lake and then bounce back to the ward. He did not know until we spoke to the bishop. I told him, but when the bishop said no, unless it's in fasting or other, it goes right to Salt Lake and we don't see it again. When the bishop told him that, he said, oh, I didn't realize that. I need to still pray about it. And that's the compromise we came up with, was it will go directly to our bishop. And I told him, if the bishop feels like it should go to downtown Salt Lake, he can pray about it. He has the mantle. He can send it to Salt Lake, but I do not want to directly have it go to this account. So because of things like that we've been able to compromise on, I'm okay with my daughter being baptized soon.
Yeah.
The only contention I would have is that, she's now a member of record, and that's something that the church now kind of put a check on.
Yeah.
But that is something that can be rectified in a year, 2 years, or, if she goes up and says, I don't, it's something that can be rectified.
Absolutely. It's more the teachings than the ritual. I mean, the ritual is, like you say, is a party. It's like, we're going to give her a party. I'm okay with that. It's like all the other birthday parties, all the other rituals that we do as Americans, even. If you just look at it as a ritual, then you're fine, because it can always, the only thing that can't be rectified are weirdo teachings. And, but you haven't reached that yet. You don't have someone saying, oh, you can't hold a job. You need to get married at 18 and have as many babies as you can. You got some time to deal with that if that, doctrine goes down.
And the church may actually be changing by then, by the time my daughter is 18, because they're trying. I mean, that when we were talking about them changing, why won't they change? Why won't they? I truly am starting to see that they try to do it on a lower level and slowly do things, and then wake up one day and say, oh, no, it's always been like this.
Well, Camille Johnson is a perfect example of that. She's a perfect example. It's like, oh, well, example of what? Not listening to the prophet. But, President Oaks is like, what? No, she's fabulous. And we're like, wait, what?
She's a great example.
But now all the little girls and young women are like, I want to be like Sister Johnson. I'm going to be a lawyer too.
Lawyer.
I'm going to be going, absolutely, young lady, you may do that. And so we're like,
that's the thing. What were you going to say, Lila? Because I know you grew up in that same era. We all did.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a bit, what's the word? Triggering or something. It makes me want to explode, because it's like, the reason why I did what I did and had the babies I had and didn't work outside the home. I literally worked from my house making pennies, doing paintings and sewing for people, because I didn't want to work outside the home. It was because of President Benson. Yeah. And now they're acting, and Camille Johnson's like, well, I just chose, I went to school and I got my
my own personal revelation. I prayed about it. And it's like, wait, you were allowed to do that? I was allowed to do that because my parents were very much about education. Yeah. And they said personal revelation. But you were allowed to do that too, because that's not what my girlfriend, who got married at 19 and is now about to have a granddaughter, and we're the same age. It's just like you said, it's very triggering, because the gaslighting. Yes, don't tell millions of us that this was not what was being taught. If you've changed it, great. Fine. If Camille is like, listen, I had personal revelation, awesome. But don't say this didn't happen. Right. Yeah. Because it happened. And I was great. And this is another story I've never shared, but when I was with the Philadelphia Eagles and I was leaving the Eagles, and I was interviewing with the Cleveland Browns and the Indianapolis Colts at the time. And the public relations director pulled me aside and said, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to do? Do you want to stay in the NFL? Like, what are your hopes and dreams? And I was 22. And I said to him, honestly, at the end of the day, I want to be a stay-at-home mom. I am saying this to the public relations director of the Philadelphia Eagles. And I remember him looking at me.
Career just go right down the drain.
Oh my gosh. And I remember him looking at me like I had 3 heads.
Yeah, like
I remember him. I was so embarrassed, but it was a true feel. I mean, that's all I wanted. I was like, I love the NFL. I want to do this. But once I get married, right? That's like what's in the back of your mind. Once you get married, you want to have kids, you want to stay at home.
Yeah.
But me saying it to him, this person who's in a career, he sees that I'm amazing at my job, what I was doing. I'm about to go to another team. And I say, no, I just want to be home and have babies. It was so weird. And to now be told 22-year-old Summur was completely off base. That's not what the church was teaching. Insane. And to also, I mean, we kind of touched on this in the text message with the whole Bickner, whatever his name is, speech. I'm sitting here saying, so you're I believe he's Catholic. I'm saying, so you're telling me that the Catholic Church this is their stance, because obviously this is what their members are saying. But the church's stance was for women to get an education and a career in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
That the Catholic Church was the only church. I mean, because that's, René, you mentioned earlier, this isn't just a Mormon thing. This is a society thing. Yeah. Racism, the women stay at home. This is a society thing. But don't tell me within the church that they were saying something different, because they weren't. They were not telling me to get a career. They were not telling me to get an education. They were saying your one job is to be a mother, a wife and mother, which is very traumatic to those who have never been married and cannot have children. Right. So don't say now these women who've been struggling all their lives to do what they've been told to do since they were 8. Don't tell them now, no, we never really said that. That was something
Yeah. I remember going out to lunch on Mother's Day after whatever. And we're sitting there at this little restaurant, little cafe, and the waiters are being so nice. And of course they come up and the first thing they say is, Happy Mother's Day. Hope you enjoy your Mother's Day. And I said to my husband, I said, that's what these women are talking about. He has no idea if I'm a mother. He doesn't know if I'm a grandmother. I could have been barren. I thought I was the first year of our marriage. And, but they just assume you're a woman. So Happy Mother's Day. And they don't understand how much that hurts. And, you know, I wish Mother's Day would just go away. Every day should be Mother's Day. And, you know, pick another time with your family. Please, let's get rid of this stupid holiday. But
no, it's tough. It's really tough. And I know people who, you know, as a woman, their first fear is, am I going to get married?
Yeah.
And once they get married, their second fear is, can I have children? Yeah. And that is not life. That should not be what as women we are concerned about. We should not be thinking, am I going to find somebody to spend the rest of my life with? It is something that we all want. We want the companionship, but it shouldn't be a fear. It shouldn't be something that is so embedded that I cannot reach a certain level in heaven without this. That should not be the case. And
there again, I don't think that other religions teach that. They might say, like,
no, they don't.
Like I was saying before, people would say to us, oh, you must be either Mormon or Catholic because we had a large family. So, but they don't say, oh, but if you don't have a large family, you're not going to heaven. I mean, I don't know.
I believe we're the only faith that actually has that in the doctrine, that you need to be married to be at a certain level and have children to be at a certain level. Yeah, I believe we're the only one that's in the doctrine, and it is so harmful. I do believe that the church is going to try to, again, back away from this doctrine, but they can't keep up with the internet. So normally they would kind of do a whisper campaign. That's what we call in the political lingo, where you're not doing it outright, but you kind of put it out there, and then people start to say it, and then all of a sudden it's true. right?
Yes.
That is what the church is used to doing, but
Yes.
the internet is too fast. And so normally, Camille saying this at BYU would be like a little whisper campaign, and women leave and say, oh, we've got this. But now the internet's like, no. I'm going to take you back to this speech. I'm going to put you down here. So I think the church is going to have to start changing their tactics.
Yeah.
Because what they've done before in the gaslighting and the slow roll, they can't do that anymore. I mean, not to jump topics, but to talk about the Charlie Bird situation with the fact they're in our stake. Charlie Bird and his husband are active members. They take the sacrament, full callings, worthy members. Just in 2015, they were being called apostates, right? They were literally, that's what, when the ban was happening with the children, they changed the lingo to, if you are a gay member of the church, you are now an apostate.
Yeah.
Now we're in 2024 and you're now considered a full participating member in this ward, because as we know, that's not across the board yet.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing little things happening on a local level, and then it gets rolled out so that, no, we've always been accepting. We've always said that this is the way it is.
Yeah. Well,
always
Summur,
rocking a hat.
Exactly. I love that. Probably, as in all other things, they need a woman to be their PR director. And that's the problem, is because the women would be going, yeah, we already knew that. And you can't say that. And men are just like, what do you want me to say, sir? I'm on, here I am, General MacArthur.
Bully. Stop bullying us. We know. We know what they were teaching. I was there.
That's right.
And the church, the problem, I just want to say this last thing. The problem with the church, the biggest thing they did wrong was starting out at the very beginning with Joseph Smith saying, I speak to God.
Yes.
And everything that comes out of my mouth, basically is of God. And then making a shit ton of mistakes and saying, well, it was God, it wasn't me. And Bill Reel made me laugh the other day. He said, did you hear that bumpity bump? That was throwing God under the bus.
That's a quote from Joseph Smith, when it was like, well, sometimes revelations are from God, sometimes they're from Satan. And I'm like, I think they're all from Satan.
And then it's like, that's real healthy. Why do we have prophets then? If we don't know which one it is, is that any good for us? Yeah, it's
God. Well, you ladies are amazing. And I am very fearful that this is not going to be the only podcast between Summur, Lila, and René. And I think there will be more to come, because this has just been so fun. And I can't thank you enough, Summur, for sharing. And I really, really, I think there are some women that will be listening going, thank you. I'm not the only person that, because my husband does the same thing. He just goes quiet. And then, and I even joked with him the other day. I said, well, now that I have you in the car and you can't get out, I'm going to go into my little rant. And he just kind of smiled, because that's what I've been doing. It's like, we're in the car and I was like, hey, did you know this church is getting fined again from the SEC, And he's like, oh crap, here we go. There's no way for me to escape.
Can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Can't go anywhere.
Oh, anyway, you guys are fabulous. This has been so great. Thank you again. And Lila, thanks for taking this has just been so wonderful. So thanks for joining us on She Became Visible. And I love that you are a perfect example of showing women, not just talking about it, but actually showing women the actions that you have to take to become visible and to become your own person. So it's been great.
Love
so
you guys.
Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.